Pandora's box has been opened, and the cracks in the walls are widening. Secrets are no longer secrets, and lies are exposed. Thanks to the initiative of a few people in the US Congress, we are able to see the crudest side of the world through the eyes of someone who was tightly connected to the center of power. The king is naked, and he is no more than a dog with no restraints. An animal who cannot contain his own urges, a devil who consumes the flesh of the innocent. The content of the Epstein files pierces right through the veil of normality on which our social order is based. The average man who rambles about the corruption of politicians would never have imagined how corrupt these actually are. And this is because the assumption was that with the advancement of history, we've ceased to be cannibalistic, both literally and metaphorically. But Epstein presents to us a different picture of what reality is, or at least could be. The files are vast, and the amount of connections that can be made is equally vast. We are already seeing old wild conspiracies being corroborated by new information. In there we find claims from victims who attest that acts of infant dismemberment, cannibalism, satanic rituals, and rape were performed on yachts. The name of an ex-CIA director and US president connected to this appears in the same email. The word pizza seems to be a favorite of the senders and receivers, reminiscent of the Podesta leaks. Other coded words like beef jerky and shrimp appear in quite weird and suggestive contexts. Accusations of horrifying child molestation done by Donald Trump with other people present are also there. The list goes on and on. Yet a lot of it is not confirmed, and some of the information comes from extrapolated repressed memories of the victims via hypnotic regression. This does not make it true or untrue, but it sits in a gray area, no longer just uncertain, but actually quite plausible. It's interesting to see how the various societal factions are reacting to what's being unfolded. The fourth estate, meaning the Western mainstream media, which is intimately connected to the power structure, can't cover up this historic release, and it cannot ignore it either. Thus, its role is to downplay it and spin it favorably, so that it can attack its geopolitical enemy and its associates from the inside, Russia and its right-wing Western sympathizers, the ones who pose a threat to the current political and ideological status quo. Epstein is stripped of his CIA, Mossad, and Israel ties and is presented to us as a KGB agent who ran a honey trap operation with young Russian girls to blackmail powerful people from all around the world. The magnifying glass is now on an external adversary who played a trick on Western leaders and celebrities. We are presented thus with an attack on the entire collective, on Western identity. This distorted picture can find its correction in the fifth estate, the alternative media on the internet, to the extent to which it's not bought by higher corporate interests. It's here that information can still be filtered through a less agenda-driven lens. And this is where it actually gets more interesting. It's in this area that you can still see how authentic people react and think about the problem. It's here that you can see how the different cultural streams and collectives governed by the political and ideological egregores position themselves psychologically, philosophically, and morally on the issue. Firstly, we have the average Joe, who is not following much of what is occurring. This type is usually disinterested in deep topics and can swing from one side to the other depending on the cultural trend, but he is generally not psychologically inclined towards conspiracies or anything that challenges the norm. A veil is covering his eyes and protecting him from anything that sounds a bit too outlandish. Adjacent to this type, we can find a certain category of political leftists. The status quo defenders, whose psychology is wired so that a topic like the Epstein files, especially in its darker tone, is automatically associated with right-wing conspiracy nuts. The deep truth does not matter to these people because they are in a political battle where the stakes are about whose ideology will prevail, no matter if it is grounded in truthfulness or not. But if the files become a useful instrument of political attack, they will use it. Then we have a certain kind of secular leftists like Kyle Kulinski, who are more principled and willing to challenge the status quo. They don't have a problem piercing through the veil of normality whenever the information leads there. They will still be ideologically biased and follow their own agenda, but that won't stop them from making concessions where concessions are due, even if that means contradicting their own ontological framework. So the elite people caught in the Epstein scandal can be accused of being actual demons or demonic on the secular talk, even if secularism doesn't allow for such quote-unquote superstitious ideas. It's ironic that on the other side of the aisle, someone like Nick Fuentes, who represents the far-right type, which has become ever more popular in the last years, is less willing to jump on the conspiracy wagon. It's also ironic that he is less psychologically inclined to interpret the events from the files within the framework of his own Catholic religion, and is instead discouraging people from doing so in favor of a whites versus Jews narrative, which is also a reality exposed by the files, but far from being the only relevant one. His attacks on Tucker Carlson for talking about demons, for engaging in topics like remote viewing and UFO disclosure are very telling. He claims he is interested in the truth, yet he is choosing to discard anything supernatural, which one could think is unusual for a Christian, but in reality that's not the case, as proven by Nick and others. A lot of Christians are raised into Christianity and they don't undergo a certain process of searching for answers. Some of the converts also look for prestige or a tradition which can provide them with something favorable. Christianity is just another mental and physical habit for some of them, and it's not fully differentiated from the predominating ideas of the zeitgeist. It seems that a lot of Christians keep their religion in a personal box as their own safe space, far away from the real world, so that when an ontological dilemma is presented, the preferred lens of interpretation is a secular one instead of a religious one. This is why someone like Nick, who is arguably being epistemologically lazy, is pushing the so-called schizos away, the people who are open to the most outlandish theories out there, and the last on our list. And here we find ourselves in a dangerous territory. On the one hand, reality is more schizo than we are taught, and the Epstein files could be a testament to that. On the other hand, not everyone who is psychologically open to this kind of material has the means to handle it properly. It's very easy to misinterpret, to be led astray by your own speculations or even by actual orchestrated psyops. It's not unreasonable to think that certain ideas are not generated organically within cultural circles. It's almost obvious that infiltrations in the fifth estate happen, as demonstrated by the link between Epstein and Chris Poole, the founder of 4chan, and through social media posts, memes, articles, videos, and so on, there is a less explicit and more subtle artificial attempt to guide all the constituents that make up public opinion, even on the fringes. Wild and nonsensical theories are thrown in the same waters where the still crazy but true ones float, so that everything becomes infected with the same stigma, which is put in place so that whoever is led to the truth is automatically marginalized by the collective. This functions as a barrier that has to be overcome. The risk of being ostracized and ridiculed needs to be taken. And it truly is the time to speculate on what we have in our hands. This without falling for obvious traps where one becomes overly paranoid and starts calling everything a distraction from something else or a psyop. and with the correct attitude, which excludes that of the quote-unquote prophetic schizos, who by feeling extremely vindicated right now have their ego so inflated that the only message they are giving is a cryptic "I told you so" without adding anything meaningful to the conversation. It's also this type which is more prone to leaps of judgment and unjustified connections. When you're in such unsafe waters, the most unwise thing to do is to get so attached to your own speculations that they become unquestionable certainties. And it's better to avoid the mental habit of claiming that every major event that happens or the absence of something major happening, like the retaining of the Epstein files or the release of these files, is exactly what they wanted from the start, whoever they are. It's just sloppy thinking. But we must move forward with the risk of being wrong, and even the wildest speculations are to be considered or evaluated before being discarded or embraced. First, we must lay out the metaphysical framework with which we can interpret what is happening and why it's happening, especially now that normality is shattered by these official revelations. Unlike some Christians who don't want to view this through a spiritual lens, the evidence seems to point more and more towards a picture of reality which is not discontinued from what was before the advent of modernity. Cults still exist. Pederasty and pedophilia are still a thing. Sacrificial rituals are still practiced. Cannibalism is still in place. They only went underground, and they don't seem to be a marginalized phenomenon as the media portrays it whenever some case goes public, calling it satanic panic. They do seem instead to be a recurring theme in elite circles, as testified by traumatized surviving victims and by some of the content of the emails. Yet we still remain at the level of speculations for now. The most important revelations are spiritual in nature. If such practices as those mentioned before take place, does it mean that the people who govern us are just misguided and they don't know what they're doing? Or on the contrary, they know exactly what and why they are doing it, and they are gaining something through these corrupt acts? Who or what are they serving? Let's assume that some of the victims are not lying or hallucinating for a moment. Let's assume they actually experienced what they are saying. It's not unrealistic that the most powerful people would also be the most predatory in nature, because in order to reach the heights of power, you cannot be a servile person. Your ambition to win over others has to be very strong, as you wield the power to control the masses. In order to control them, you need to have a positive connection with them. You need to feed on their energy while they expect something in return from you, promises which usually are not delivered. So the king is sustained by the people. In the very fabric of nature, lions have to kill innocent and defenseless herbivores like gazelles to survive. Is humanity any different? Is it an exception? In the mid-80s, the book Far Journeys by the astral projection researcher Robert Moreau was published. In it, the concept of luge was illustrated, a form of energy produced by intense human emotions. A dark picture was presented where humanity is none other than a luge-producing farm for incorporeal beings on the astral plane. The same idea is found also in the Austrian esotericist Rudolf Steiner, who claims that, quote, "There are beings in the spiritual realms for whom anxiety and fear emanating from human beings offer welcome food. When humans have no anxiety and fear, then these creatures starve. If fear and anxiety radiates from people and they break out in panic, then these creatures find welcome nutrition and they become more and more powerful. These beings are hostile towards humanity. Everything that feeds on negative feelings, on anxiety, fear and superstition, despair or doubt, are in reality hostile forces in supersensible worlds, launching cruel attacks on human beings, while they are being fed." End quote. In his later work, Robert Moreau balanced this view with a positive contextualization about deluge produced by love and positive feelings. Nonetheless, the dark side of the coin is still there, and with the latest revelations, a connection can be attempted. The rituals described involved orgiastic acts and torture which elicit intense emotions. Through extreme sexual pleasure and pain, a lot of luge is produced which can feed whatever entities these people are serving, directly or indirectly. Theoretically, the same could apply for actual acts of cannibalism which might have taken place according to a victim, and to the interpretation of certain emails with coded language. We could go even deeper in our speculations and ask if these people are even human or something else. There are weird accusations from victims and testimonies floating around in this space, yet they are not taken seriously because the stigma is too strong. You're automatically discarded as an imbecile for even taking something like that into consideration, and the environment that has been created around such theories by its proponents is far from being very attractive to people who consider themselves intelligent. The aesthetic and kind of arguments present in such circles aren't helping either, which makes the journey of someone who's seeking answers very arduous. But it is symbolically relevant that the truth is hidden within a jar of lies. On our journey for truth, the first guardian of the threshold is represented by the gatekeepers of the current social order and epistemic paradigm. Its priests are the representatives of materialistic science, people to whom Epstein was well connected, and with whom he shared mutual beneficial friendships. It's interesting that he was very close to Lawrence Krauss, one of the guardians, and even helped him out during his own sexual harassment scandal. These agents show up whenever something out of the ordinary occurs to reassure us that there is nothing to see there. They publicly mock and dismiss whatever could make the current scientific paradigm shift and lose its grip on the public. They do not act as curious seekers in search for answers as they should, because their role is to protect the current paradigm at all costs, giving extremely forced explanations for unusual phenomena whenever they are confronted by it. Let's consider the case with David Grush, the first whistleblower who came out in an official setting, such as a congressional hearing, and claimed that government contractors are in possession of crashed exotic material and that non-human biologics were recovered with it. The dismissal from the Guardians was unanimous. Zero curiosity was displayed. This makes it very suspicious on their part if we assume that we are dealing with highly intelligent people. Their position and behavior forces us to raise the question: do the priests actually believe their own dogma? Epstein himself was not contained within the limits of the ideology of these guardians, as he seemed to have had a certain interest in philosophy, as illustrated by his reading list and interview with Steve Bannon. Fair to say that the Bannon documentary was planned to rehabilitate his image, and that Epstein might have faked his philosophical positions, yet even to entertain such ideas is a sign of intelligence, which we should not confuse with morality. Virginia Giuffre, one of the victims, claimed in her book that, quote, Epstein saw himself as an intellectual prodigy, but for all his cultivation of the upper crust, however, he often appeared unsophisticated and even oblivious, end quote. In the files we find intellectual exchanges between Deepak Chopra, Jack Sarfati, and Brian Josephson, with George Knapp and Jeffrey Mishlove cc'd. It's quite peculiar that he was gathering these people to confront each other via emails. These are either intellectuals or scientists or journalists who go beyond materialist science and are connected either to spirituality and parapsychology or directly to UFOs, like in the case of Jack Sarfati, a theoretical physicist who made his positions publicly clear on the subject, and George Knapp, an investigative journalist turned ufologist, after his interviews in the late 70s with John Lear, a pilot for the CIA, and Bob Lazar, the S4 whistleblower. Interestingly enough, Epstein bought a property in New Mexico called Zorro Ranch. The stated reason for this is that he wanted to be close to the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which was the central site of the Manhattan Project, in order to meet with the scientists from the Santa Fe area. The Los Alamos Lab is famous in UFO lore for being the place where Bob Lazar was hired before being recruited to work on the sports model at S4. But there are even more telling stories connected to the same lab, like that of engineer Bill Uhouse, who claimed that 4 aliens were taken to a Los Alamos facility after the Kingman, Arizona incident, and they were interrogated by astrophysicists and scientists. One of those same beings, which is named J-Rod, is then transported at S4 and tested by biologist Dan Burish, who became a whistleblower in 2003. These could be just some circumstantial facts that have nothing to do with the direct connection between Epstein and the UFO world if it weren't for a testimony from one of his victims.
You've mentioned before that you've viewed him shapeshifting in front of you, and there's this kind of connection to aliens and, or at least UFOs and things. So
yeah, I saw a UFO in New Mexico. He shapeshifted on the island in the Caribbean. It's not just one alien experience. They're 2 on 2 different fucking properties.
Interesting. I remember you said that you went out to have a cigarette and you saw like a triangular shaped UFO coming over the horizon.
Like 3 lights, and they started spinning like hectically, and like it came close. It was definitely not like a normal aircraft, is what I'm going to tell you. Like that was something very weird, and I got locked out there and I couldn't get back in. And I think that's probably when that weird thing happened to me with that thing of the laboratory. I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly when that happened.
Yeah,
and
right.
People say, was I on drugs? I wasn't on drugs, not to my knowledge. If they had drugged me, it was like a pretty good drug where you don't actually feel high or anything. You just see things. I mean,
Right, but you also said it was like 10 seconds, right? This wasn't like something where it was some persistent hallucination or something?
It happened like this. It was like, I looked away from him, then I looked at him, and he was this creature, and I just kept looking. I was like, and then I looked away, and then I looked back, and it was him again. Because the thing is, I didn't know what to do. I was like, and also it like made me freeze.
This isn't necessarily an isolated case. While Juliet is the only victim who has made such claims explicitly, Maria Farmer, another woman victimized by Epstein and his circle, has expressed something similar through her art. This painting is a symbolic representation of her own experience. Here, Ghislaine Maxwell is turned into a giant lizard eating from a human corpse, while Epstein is depicted on a UFO. Satanic symbolism, the number of the beast, dead babies, tortured women, other powerful people like Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Elon Musk, and others appear in a surreal and biblically apocalyptic Lovecraftian horror setting. The word FBI is written everywhere, as if to say that they know and they are complicit. It begs the question, why did she use this symbolism? Is it corroborating what the other victim is saying? We asked before if these people are actually human, and it might be the case that they are not. The truth might be darker than previously imagined. There is an ongoing cover-up of the true implications of the content of the emails, with the redaction of the perpetrators and a constant deflection from questions that actually matter. Attempts to clean up this mess are made by the current administration by pretending that there is nothing major to be discussed, pushing it all under the rug. But the truth is that the implications are huge. And if we connect this to the free UFO hearings that have been available for everyone to watch, starting from the first one in 2023, we can come up with a hypothesis of why there is so much resistance against the official acknowledgement of both the disturbing content of the Epstein files and disclosure. In the case of the latter, the quasi-official excuse till now has been that it's a national security issue in the context of a supposed reverse engineering technological race with China and Russia. But the real reason seems to be more about who the people in charge are, if we can call them people. And if they are human, then it could be about what kind of deals they've made with non-human intelligences. And such a disclosure would disrupt our current materialist paradigm because there is a tight link between the UFO phenomenon and the supernatural. This is obvious for everyone who has spent a bit of time researching the topic. But the Epstein tale doesn't end here. On the surface, the story is about underage girls, massages, and blackmailing powerful people. But when we dig deeper, we have to ask why Epstein was so well connected to so many scientists, funding them and their projects with millions of dollars. The idea that he was doing it just as a philanthropic facade to trick other important people seems quite naive. Most probably he was pursuing his own bigger projects. The victim Virginia Giuffre wrote about Epstein that, quote, "He also fantasized about improving the human race by fathering children who carried his superior genes. Sometimes he'd talk about his plans to use his Zorro Ranch as a literal breeding ground to propagate babies. Who would birth these imagined offspring? The girls he kept in his orbit, of course, and he thought we'd see it as an honor," end quote. Ideas about eugenics were certainly present, and there are claims of labs where cloning might have occurred, according to the previously mentioned victim Juliet Bryant. Another interest shared by both Epstein and Maxwell was that of deep oceanic exploration. His ranch had also some peculiar symbolism which connects to none other than Atlantis. The labyrinth seems to resemble the map of Atlantis as described by Plato. Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly owns a submarine named Atlantis. And this seems to be a recurring theme also in some of the emails. Thanks to the work of the dark journalist, which everybody should check, we are able to see, among others, a very interesting exchange in the files. Quote, "Here's the info on Cuba. I'll forward the other documents as well. If 38001 still has good connections to Fidel, maybe we could go after both the gold and Atlantis," end quote. The email was sent by John Haybush, a longtime public servant in government agencies, starting with the Air Force at the Pentagon, where he was officially responsible for responding to civilians who reported UFOs with a clear and dismissive message, and who has now publicly shifted his opinion on the topic. The receiver is Ted Waite, the billionaire founder of the computer company Gateway Inc., who's been Ghislaine's romantic partner starting from 2003, who on the other hand helped him buy the super yacht Plan B, on which it is reported that they carried their submarine. The context for this is the original email from below, which is a text written by Terry Garcia, the executive vice president of the National Geographic Society, where the work of Polina Zalitsky is mentioned, an oceanographer who in 2001 discovered some very interesting underwater ruins off the coast of Cuba, which could be reminiscent of Atlantis, which is why the gentlemen in question were interested and were communicating in the first place. So we can see that behind the scenes, powerful people connected directly to Maxwell, most probably involving even her and Epstein, were on the hunt for Atlantis. We can only speculate about the reasons why, which could involve lost advanced technology. If we listen to Bob Lazar's testimony from his time at S4, the information that he received about some of the craft that was being studied is that they weren't dealing only with recently crashed objects, but with archaeological discoveries. Could it be that these people were and still are looking for some ancient advanced tech? They wouldn't be the first billionaires who try to get their hands on something like that as far as we know. Actual archaeological wars over this and more might be going on alongside state-funded expeditions which on the surface are presented as environmentally focused, but whose true purpose is more esoteric in nature. The moral of the story is that on the one hand, there is an undisclosed interest in fringe topics shown by people in elite circles, and on the other hand, the same topics are completely discarded by academia and mainstream publications for the public at large. The elite thus have access to privileged knowledge and possibly to secret science, while the plebeians are told by the official representatives that such things do not exist. And when someone like Graham Hancock is bringing research and speculations about the possible advanced lost civilization to the public, he is immediately attacked and discarded by the gatekeepers in academia. A totally plausible hypothesis is ridiculously attacked as fascist and racist by the guardians of the system. Meanwhile, the resourceful billionaires are highly interested in it. Isn't it weird that Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's father, established scientific journals which play an important role in deciding which theories are acceptable and which are not? Isn't it weird that what is given to us through official channels is almost always a big "there's nothing to see here, and if you think there is, you are crazy"? Isn't it also strange that they are still clinging to that when the cracks are so widely open? On the other side, once you break free from the obvious official lies, the danger doesn't cease to exist. A mix of false theories, ideas intentionally and artificially designed to mislead, paranoid tendencies, wrong mental habits, and so on pollute the waters. As we said before, the real stories are labeled as psyops. Everything becomes a distraction. The real conspiracy from 2 months ago, which is now confirmed, instantly becomes a new distraction for whatever other random event that is occurring according to the schizoid mind. It's as if one cannot acknowledge that there are multiple events happening at the same time and has to invent a paranoid reason for why something is now in the spotlight more than anything else. This kind of thinking has to be discarded completely, as it serves no useful purpose. It only damages the curiosity to look deeper into certain fringe topics that might occasionally emerge in the mainstream, and it promotes superficial conclusions where complexity and nuance are required. As for the central points discussed in this video, it is still premature to come to a definitive conclusion. The victims have to be taken into consideration, even though at close analysis we can find some inconsistencies in their claims, but that is not necessarily indicative that they are making anything up. The wildest assertions have to be taken seriously as well, because if true, they could have major ontological and political implications. And while the speculations could lead to a dead end, nonetheless they have to be put forward to form a viable hypothesis. If you don't risk being wrong, you'll never find the truth. And the Epstein files release is the perfect historic opportunity to search it and to shift the current paradigm.